I know from Jim and Tim that in the
alternative documentary. For the next 3 days, it's going to be called Reclaim Documentary. Come and see me if you'd like to be in that.
DS 107.
Thank you, Martha. I have to say, I'm a little intimidated to just be sitting across from such an awesome set of folks up here. So I'll try to keep my nerves at bay while I'm asking you all questions. But I think for those, we've been throwing around this acronym DTLT, getting the crew back together, where it all started. There's a lot of, those things that have been said recently. And so I want to just start with just introducing you all, giving you a chance to introduce yourself, what your position was at DTLT, and what your position is now. And then we can kind of go into what DTLT was, So Jim, you've got the mic if you wanted to start, and then we could just pass it down.
I'm going to actually give it to Chip. I'm going to let Chip start it off because I think that some of it starts there.
My name is Chip German, and I was Vice President for Information Technology at the University of Mary Washington during the early development phases of DTLT. So I came here in 2003. The first time they had a Vice President for Information Technology, I came here from UVA, and I guess I was here until 2009. And so that was my position then. My position now is recline hosting because I'm retired. But I did a bunch of things after I went to another school after Mary Washington. I left during the period of presidential confusion here and went to, which one? Well, I participated in several of them, but and then went to Millersville University in Pennsylvania, and came back to the University of Virginia, where I had worked for 20 years before. And I had a deeply unrelated job for the first 2 years that I was there, and then worked for the University of Virginia Library for a long time after that, where I helped with the early development of another idea, which was digital preservation, the Academic Preservation Trust, a consortium of institutions working on figuring out how to keep what we produced. And a lot of my thinking about that was based in these years of thinking about the products and how we could sustain them into the future.
So. Since the microphone's down here.
Probably in sequence.
Yeah.
Maybe Gardner is next.
Yeah, go next, Gardner.
Okay, thanks. Gardner Campbell, my position was untenable, and now it's unsustainable. I was an English professor at the University of Mary Washington when Chip German plucked me from obscurity in the spring of 2003 to become vice president for teaching and learning technologies. That started a faculty grievance and was resolved, thankfully, by the fall, at which time I assumed full duties, sort of Damocles sheathed. I was at Mary Washington through 2006, decided to head for what seemed to be pastures at another school, quickly found out, no, green because of manure. And so I came back, but that time just as an English professor. Since then, I've been at many schools, can't hold a job or one step ahead of the law, depending on your interpretation. I told you I was an English professor. Went to Baylor University, where I was head of their teaching and learning center and professor. And then went to Virginia Tech, where I was part of their, their teaching and learning technology group, and also an English professor. And then left from there to come to Virginia Commonwealth University, where I was a vice provost for learning innovation and student success. And learning innovation is no longer a title anyone has. At Virginia Commonwealth University, I retired that jersey since 2016. I guess that's right. I've been an English professor, which is what I'm doing now.
Hi all, I'm Gary Slazak. I currently still work here at UMW. I'm the Director of Digital Learning Support. I started at Mary Wash in 1999 as an instructional technology liaison. My first field job after grad school. So, when we started here, instructional technology liaison was basically, we were each in an individual academic building, and we were there to help faculty with their printers mostly. So at least, and then also, in your free time and, as, they come knocking on your door, help them with instructional technology. So over the time and under, Chip's guidance, we developed and came together with DTLT, and we all kind of gathered together in an office not far from here over in DuPont Hall. That way. Yeah, okay, thank you. When I started there, I was associate director. Martha was the director. And then I became the director. And then I went to IT. We ran the help desk for a while. And then I came back here and back to digital learning support. So I, had a nice time managing a lot of these folks. If you can imagine managing Jim Groom, that was my pinnacle of management. So, but I'm glad to be here and to see some really dear friends here for the first time in a long time.
Thank you, Jerry. My name is Andy Rush. I was part of the DTLT crew, and I got here a year before Jerry in 1998. But he also is older than me by like 9 months. So there's all kinds of dynamics there too. So I always remind him of that. And I was here for 17 years until what I'll call the Miami Dream popped into existence. And that was, it's a long story, so I won't tell the whole story, but it got me interested in moving further south. And I'm a cyclist, and so cycling year-round was the appealing thing. So I moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and I currently work at the University of North Florida, which I dearly love, and I already miss it and can't wait to get back. But I'm just thrilled to be here with folks. And my history, I started out in the SUNY system in New York State. So I went to college at SUNY Cortland, worked for SUNY Cortland starting in 1993. So if you do the math, you can see how many years I've been in instructional technology. It's a big year for me. And then moved to Oneonta and worked there for a couple of years, also in the SUNY system. Met somebody, moved to Virginia, and we arrived here in 1998. So tons of memories, and in avoiding, if you know exit 126 on I-95 coming from the south, you avoid that like the plague. And so I took the back roads to get to the hotel and drove on some of the roads that I cycled on for 17 years. And tears were literally streaming down my face driving on some of those roads and remembering hills, which I don't have where I currently live. I have bridges over the intercoastal is what I climb on these days. But seeing the actual hills and the rolling, curving roads around this area is just a wonderful feeling and brought back great memories. So, but yeah, I'm just thrilled to be here.
My name is Martha Fabertus. And I don't know if I predate Gardner's arrival on this campus. What year did you arrive at Mary Washington, Gardner?
You do.
I do.
And I came in 1994 in the fall. I think you were probably a junior that year, but I'm not sure.
So I arrived on this campus before any of these yahoos. I was a student here in the early 90s. I came here fall 1992, graduated, moved away, got a graduate degree, came back to work supporting printers with Sherry and Andy on pre-DTLT. then went away, came back. Like there's like a force. Came back here in 2002 and worked in DTLT as an instructional technology specialist, and then as a director for 2 years, and then I worked on special projects for a few years. But the best job I ever had here came around when this building opened. I was the founding director of the Digital Knowledge Center, which is our digital tutoring center here, not ours, theirs now, digital tutoring center here at Mary Washington, a place that holds a special spot in my heart. I left Mary Washington, though, in 2019 to move to Plymouth, New Hampshire, where I work at Plymouth State University in the Open Learning and Teaching Collaborative, which is the teaching center essentially at PSU. So I don't really work on the tech side of things anymore. I do a lot of faculty development, faculty support, instructional design, and I love it. And it's surreal to be back here again.
So I'm Jim Groom, and I came here in 2005, and I came here from the City University of New York. And one of the things that drew me here is Gardner Campbell's ad basically said, we want people who understand and work with cPanel, MediaWiki, WordPress, and other things that were unfathomable in an instructional technology kind of position. And I think in some ways that was the beginning of a brave new world of stepping into this group with them and what they were doing. I had some taste of that with Zach Davis and Luke Walter, who's here today at the City University of New York with their instructional technology fellows. But I do think Mary Washington, right? What did Whitman said? I was simmering, and Emerson brought me to a boil. That was kind of like what happened here when I realized what they were doing with something as simple as cPanel for instructional technology. And that's an interesting transition from fixing printers to actually showing people MediaWiki or WordPress. And I think there's something there, but we'll get to that.
Hello, I'm Shannon Hauser, and I was a student aide in DTLT. An alum, yeah. So I attended 2006 to 2010, as I not only worked there, but I was kind of a hanger-on. A lot of times Jim would be like, are you on the clock or not? Why are you here? So I spent those years listening and learning a lot of things from the crew you see up here, and did some things in the library a bit, and I feel like I've often described it to my colleague Carlin over there. I got my monkey's paw wish, where I was like, it'd be really great to work in the DKC with Martha. And so it's like I now work in the DKC, but it's because Martha Burtis had to leave so I could work there. So it's worked out. I'm like, yes, I get to be the DKC. Oh, bye. So yeah, that's what I do. Carrying on the legacy of working with students along with my colleague Carlin, who's back there. So.
Hi, my name's Tim Owens. I was working at Longwood University, and I was friends or acquaintances, I don't know, with Tom Woodward, and he had blogged about this. I can't remember if we had actually met, but this was okay. To be clear, this was the pre-Musk era where Twitter wasn't full of Nazis. So everybody I felt like I was friends with online. And Tom was blogging about this guy named Jim Groom that was going to be doing this online course called DS106. It was going to be all about doing art online. And I watched a video. He had these Mickey ears on, and I was like, what a psycho. I just this is weird and interesting. And so I'm repairing laptops and doing boring stuff at Longwood, but I started making art online and meeting all these people that even Brian Lamb, Grant Potter. Grant created this radio station. I tried to do something with TV and video, and it was a thrilling time of my life. And meanwhile, I was trying to do more with faculty at Longwood, but there wasn't a position for that. There was a director of instructional technology. I was told that I couldn't even apply because I didn't have a master's degree. And so they wouldn't even ever consider me for anything related to instructional technology because I couldn't talk to faculty because I wasn't on the same level as them. So that was devastating, but I was doing that. And Jim was working with the library at Longwood and had come down. And so we we had lunch, and he was like, "You need to come work for me. Like, you need to come work at DTLT with me." And I was like, I mean, that would be awesome. And so I applied, got the job, and DS-106 was like the main thing. I to be clear, like they had just gone through one semester, and then that was the summer of oblivion. That was my first introduction. Literally was like day one, sit down with Martha, we're live streaming, and you all are at a summer camp where the kids have been stolen, maybe murdered. And it was amazing. I mean, we were over in a theater building. Highly recommend you put your instructional technology group in a theater building. Like it's the right vibe for sure. And had an amazing time with these people. I do remember when I was applying for the job, Jim said, "Do you know anything about running servers? Because we have this blogging platform called UMW Blogs, and we're really struggling to manage it." And I said, "I don't do that. I know nothing about running servers. Is that a deal breaker?" And he said, "Well, no, like we'll figure it out." I was just curious, and I said, "Oh, good." I was really concerned because I don't know anything about running servers. I learned a thing or two while I was there about running servers, and so we started Reclaim Hosting while I was there, and the rest is kind of history from that. What I'm doing now is running a retro arcade in Fredericksburg.
Well, thank you. That was what? Yeah, I know. It's like we're gonna have to keep, some of the other answers maybe a little more, time sensitive. But I did. Yes, I'll try to keep. But no, it is really interesting just to hear you all, because hear you all talk about how you came to be. So for those who don't know me and my background, I guess, so I'm Lauren Hanks, Director of Operations at Reclaim, but I knew you all as a student when I was at Mary Washington, and I was a student aide my senior year when this building first opened, and I helped you move to this building. That's how I met Jim and Tim and got started, and then ended up going to Reclaim after I graduated, but worked closely with Martha and, most of these folks here. And so it's kind of cool to, I know some of what you all did just from that student perspective, but there's so much that I don't know. I took DS-106 as a student, was a part of it in some ways, but I would love to hear from you all, what is a project over those 10 plus years that you worked on that still resonates with you today? And I know that that's maybe a big question, but I'd love to hear your answer.
Can I start because I'm holding the mic?
Sure.
Cool. All right. So for me, it would be DTLT today. Pretty soon after I got there, I was fiddling around with cameras and stuff. And I got to talking to Jim, and I was like, what if we did a podcast? What if we just got in front of the camera and started talking? And Jim was like, cool. I said, what if we did it every day? He was like, okay. And, in hindsight, that was maybe a little ambitious, but we did. And so we got in front of the camera and just started talking about what we were doing. Most times there was no script. I tried to bring in other people. All those videos still exist of me and Jim and Martha and Andy sitting there talking about things like Aaron Schwartz dying, talking about an earthquake that we had here in Fredericksburg, trying the soda stream. You getting busy with the busy, right? That was our first branded, our first paid promotion on DTLT today. So, but it's really cool, and it was amazing to just be able to archive the work that we were doing. And to me, is like an amazing way for us to reflect and to even go back on those videos, because we talked to faculty, we talked to other people at UMW and beyond in the community about work that they were doing. And so it was really cool, not just to highlight what we were doing, but what they were doing too, and what we were all involved in. And, that's, to me, something cool that we did while we were there.
So I had an idea, and then I had another one. I'm going to talk about them each quickly. The first one, though, goes back to the very, very early days of DTLT when we first got our Bluehost accounts, and we were all working in different buildings still at that point. We hadn't been put together in the theater building. That didn't happen until 2006. And because we were distributed, it was hard to really stay in touch. It was hard to really know what everybody was doing. And I discovered I just really loved to install stuff on cPanel and figure out what I could do with it and hack it and play with it. And so I built this community website that it was just this side project I did, and I kind of like sent everybody a link, and I was like, hey, log into this and see what you think. And I think it kind of helped for me understand the potential when you give people that kind of open space to play in and to imagine in. As somebody who's worked in and around education and technology for so long, I really bristle at the very common statement that we like to say, which is it's not about the technology, it's about the teaching. And as working in a teaching center now, I hear that a lot, but I used to hear it a lot working in DTLT as well. And I understand where that sentiment comes from, because I don't think we should ever, just use the technology with no intentionality. But I also know from experience that sometimes you don't know what's possible until you see what's out there that can be done. And so what I love about this work is that it's always bridging that gap. It's always dancing back and forth between the teaching and the technology, and helping people realize that there is no right choice. There is just developing iteratively a better understanding of what's possible, and always working with intention. And the second project I'll just mention really quickly, but it's after most of these people were here, was we made a movie, and it was really fun. It was called The Convergence, and it was a way to introduce this building to the community, and it was a horror movie, and I got to act at work, and it was really delightful.
So I knew coming here would trigger a flood of memories. And as we talk about these projects, that's what's full in my head right now. And Smooth Elephant was one of the ones that I remember Martha started on as one of, and your chat application, that it's just, and it was a constant barrage, if you want to call it that, of these types of projects. I mean, and Gardner knows, I hope he knows how life-changing getting your own domain was, and having that be the presentation vector for all the stuff that we were working on. And so the project that I think of the most, and it's informed a lot of my stuff, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing right to this day, was the media blog. And it's this idea of, I've been working a little bit with this idea about putting video on the web, but how do you really do that and present it in a way that people can have access to it? And so back in the day, it was the Flash player that allowed video to go on the web, and these little 320 by 200 clips and web pages and things like that. But just to be able to experiment with that stuff, and then having somebody like Tim come along and actually almost in many ways being competition for, and I think at one time there was a Tim versus Andy kind of dynamic that was going on, which is great and all in fun. Yeah, exactly. And then we got to put on wigs for DTLT today at one point. So it was stuff like that there's a whole bunch of projects really that you kind of amalgamate into one that describes what we were doing. It was just a constant like synapse rush, and bouncing off ideas off of each other, and sitting in not even cubicles, but like directly across from each other, and having that dynamic play out. I mean, it sounds cliche. It sounds a little bit too much or hyperbolic, but it was just a magical time.
I'm going to go really short here because my main role in this was, I think, a term that maybe Jim got me familiar with in the earliest days, and that was fanboy. That was my job. Fanboy. I had a great deal of fun watching these people do wonderful things, of which I understood a small percentage immediately, but they taught me a lot all the way through that time. And then the other thing that I'll add, again, as Andy said, it's a kind of whole picture recollection for me. But the other thing I will say about my particular role is, in that position, you have the capacity to focus on some definable resume building tasks, as you anticipate your move to your next job and that kind of stuff, or you have the capacity to help something major happen. And I didn't always understand it, but I understood that something major was happening. And in the role that I had, you have a kind of an endless supply of water and gasoline. Pardon the, it's going to be dated really soon. I can't figure out how to do this with electricity, but water and gasoline. And a lot of folks in the role that I had tend first toward the water side. Let's put that fire out. And with Gardner's inspiration and the whole picture here, my impulse was to go tap the gasoline and throw it on the fire that was already started here, and that required no skill. It just required a little bit of daring, and that's what I remember about that. And boy, was I rewarded! It was wonderful to watch these people work.
Daring is a skill. Gardner, do you want to jump in here since you were just mentioned? I think it's a good spot.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. It was magical. I had never imagined that breadth and depth of magic would be possible. It was kind of tough. It was a little like the Citizen Kane phenomenon, where afterwards you never get the same team again. You get some amazing people, but the circumstances are never quite with all the planets in alignment and all of that. So it's it's real bittersweet for me to think about those days, because it was apparently at the time, it seemed to be a nonstop set of discoveries. You'd think, wow, we've gotten to Jupiter. And somebody's like, yeah, this is a solar system and there's a whole galaxy. So you get to the edge of the galaxy. It's like, oh, there are billions of those. Oh, and you keep going. And then there's the dark matter, which you can't even see. Oh, and then you keep going. But I would say, in addition to my very fond memory of the day when Martha said, I'm doing something with our community space, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And we were all, because at that point we were like, sure, of course that's what you do. Somebody is curating a space for your community and they're going to surprise you. Of course you would do that. Nobody said, oh, will you move the buttons around? What are we going to do? So it turned out that Martha was a Halloween aficionado, and on the day, up it goes, and all of the decor was Halloween. And at that moment, something struck me so hard that it was almost like being invited into each other's novels that we were writing with the purpose of sharing them with each other. It was wild. Virtual reality doesn't begin to describe it, just because of the sense of possibility and a weird sense of almost intimacy that came from all of that. So at any rate, there's so many magical things that happened that I was really privileged and all the rest of that to be a part of. But I will also say that magic is costly. Chip won't tell you this because Chip doesn't talk about this. And it's probably best that he doesn't, because that's how we'll know who he is. Here's how you know who I am. It's costly. It's really costly to go in front of people over and over who say, oh, that's an automobile. Where do you put the hay? I'm really confused. And then they kind of get hostile about it. It's really costly when some of the planets start to go out of alignment. It's really costly when, in my own case, I would screw up and I would see that things were put back, not just for me, but for a lot of other people as well. The team, faculty who had invested in what we were doing, my boss, you begin to understand that the reason it feels so magical is not just the sense of possibilities, it's a growing awareness of what it could be, which means a growing awareness of what's at stake. And that's really been when I think about those, really, it was just 3 years that I was leading DTLT, and really only 2 of them with a solid team, and only 1 year of what Jerry proposed we call the dream team. I think back on all those days, and they were absolutely extraordinary. And I could and have gone on and on about it. But they're costly too, not just because they're not permanent, but because you have to spend political capital in ways that you didn't even know were possible. And that's another reason why it's difficult to get things to last. But I hear nothing gold can stay. And okay, I'm 65. I guess I can see where that's going to be. And yet, if I had it all to do over again, I would be the first to sign up. It truly was magical.
I hate following Gardner. I would say, in many ways, I was the beneficiary of working with some really creative and smart people. My role was never to invent. I would say my role in this was maybe what we came to know as the bullpen, right? When we were all told, yeah, you're all going to get to come together in one space. And I was like, I had this internship at, where it was in a newsroom, and we all just pushed our desks together. What do you think of that? And everybody was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Because at the beginning, we were like drawing little floor plans. Oh, here's what it looks like if we all get a cubicle. And here's what it looks like if we all get this. Like, what about this? And they all jumped in. And we all had the advantages and the disadvantages that went with that. It was the synergy that you get from overhearing a conversation, because we all knew that we could overhear our conversations and it was okay to talk about them, right? So, I think that that to me was amazing. When you say it's not about the technology, it's about the teaching. It's also not about the technology, it's about the people, right? And their ability to work together and be together and throw crazy ideas and get mad at each other and storm out, but come back, right? And I think that's what I'll say.
Well, Jerry stole mine, because that was, I think, an instrumental thing for me as a student to sit in the space where people were being incredibly smart and thoughtful and hilarious in front of me. Probably radically changed my life, that I got to sit there and kind of watch that happen. But I will quickly throw out, I will say UMW blogs as a whole. It was something that was launched I think maybe it was fall of my sophomore year or something like that, very early. And it was a space, a WordPress multi-site. And I followed the Jim Grew method of just read people's stuff and comment. He inspired me in that way, that you could see a community of people. I had really glommed onto the idea of blogging is important. That is, watching people, especially early on, people like Gardner, people, everybody here who would write. Remember when we all blogged? I know there was that period of time, and as an 18-year-old, how important that was for me to see people be thoughtful about things and share, and then comment on my stuff, which is when you're 18 and somebody who you respect and think is very smart says, this is a really thoughtful idea. It pushes you forward in a way. And so that was always my goal when I commented on other students' things, be in that space, respond. That way you're not just speaking out into the other, somebody is paying attention to what you're doing, that people aspect, you're putting your voice out there, and I want to acknowledge it. And I'll say I have special love for it, because I'm right now in the process of sunsetting UMW blogs so it's it feels like a weird full circle kind of thing. I was there at the beginning, and here I am putting it down. My dog, old dog, it's so yeah, that would be my project.
Yeah, and I think to that point, the thing that changed the project and the idea that changed things for me was when I came here, the first directive was, you need to blog. You need to get a domain, you need to blog. And that project became, as John Udell said, this constant documenting of the work we did, whether it's UMW blogs, whether it's playing with WordPress, whether it's DS106, which was a digital storytelling class taught here, or even what became Domain of One's Own. It was all a process. And the funniest story there is I got a call from a friend of mine, or an email, I don't know what it was, Mikhail Gershovich, who was in New York at the time. I had just came here from CUNY, as I mentioned, and he's like, hey, dude, do you know that Brian Lamb has you as a link on his sidebar of his blog? I'm like, what? Who's Brian Lamb? Like, what are you talking about? And like, that was a moment where I realized that the work we were doing together was actually a much broader community. And that whole idea of the web came into focus, which was Web 2.0 or the social web, in a way that it hadn't before in my life. And the web wasn't that old yet. It was still only about 10 or 11 years old. And that was a transition, just the idea of getting a domain, being asked as part of my job to think creatively about the work we're doing. I just wonder how much that's still happening. And I think that's a really special takeaway that I'm still doing. Like that 20 years later almost, that is a constant regular in my life, is reflecting on the work I do and sharing my process. And that comes from, instructional technology, which for me is, like I said, miles away from fixing printers, but in some ways not, because I probably blog fixing my printer too.
Yeah, I was gonna just kind of adding on that. I feel like so much of what you all are saying sounds so familiar in the way that we work at Reclaim. You know, it's narrating the work that we're doing, working in highly collaborative spaces, feeling like we can think about things openly and connect with folks online and just experiment and feel safe doing it. So that's what I feel, even just hearing you all talk, is that has now bled into Reclaim Hosting and the community that we support today. The narration of the work turns into documentation and support, and supporting a community of folks just trying to work and think and learn online. So I love hearing that. I'm curious, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would have done differently?
The short answer is no. I wouldn't do anything differently. The longer answer is you think about when you get into a career and you start seeing that it is a career. You think about directions, and I graduated and got my bachelor's degree at Cortland and worked at Cortland State. It was AV technology kind of, but it was the start of what I consider my ed tech career. And all the times that you go through that, you think, all right, graduate school is the next obvious choice. When I arrived at Mary Washington and we started doing the things that we were doing, I went to George Mason and did online stuff with Virginia Tech. It was nowhere close to what we were just simply doing in the office. DTLT was my graduate school, because I learned so much from the people that I worked with, and the ability to bounce the ideas off of some really smart folks that are thinking in the same space. It was an instructional technology graduate program par excellence, and it was all I needed. So the answer is no, nothing different.
I've got a quick thought that sort of, it's not that something that we would have done, I would have chosen to do differently, except in that I would have liked to have been more aware of what we were doing in one particular, from one particular perspective. And that is the notion, and this is a little less true, but because of the work here and in other places, that it's a little less true now. But then we didn't really have a sense of how much we were blurring, would be a charitable term, burning down the fences around the institution. And the really important thing there is that some of the risks that we took had to do with things like institutional security of the student experience. The institution was very concerned to make sure that all student experience would remain private. Unless the student acknowledged in advance, and all the those kinds of laws and regulations. and we fought that a lot because what we were trying to do was connect the student experience with the world in so many ways. And so I think if I had understood it a little bit better, I might have tried to ensure that we were articulating that clearly enough that the other institutions could catch up really quickly along those lines as well. So that's just a quick comment with that. What's next?
Anyone else?
Martha?
Sure. You know, my first reaction was similar to Andy's, to say that I don't know that I would do anything differently, because all of this, the good and the bad, is part of the story that I treasure and have taken with me. And I can't really imagine how doing anything differently would have improved that. I don't think that's what I can imagine. But then when you were talking, Chip, I also started to think about something that if I have regret about, I remember when in fall of, so I taught, I think I taught my first year seminar here at Mary Washington in, what year, what fall did you leave? 15? Yeah, so fall of 15. And then I taught it again. And I to be clear, I taught one on digital identity. And I taught it again the following fall. And I remember being in a classroom with students in the fall of 15. This is a really specific regret. But it'll make sense, I promise. And asking students about sharing on social media. And I asked them, when you share something, and at that point students were still on Facebook, when you share something on Facebook, do you verify it? Do you care about that? And they said no. And I asked why, and they said, because it's not about truth, it's about telling a good story. Like, that's basically what they said, is that they didn't see this as fact sharing, as news sharing, as information sharing. They saw it as storytelling and getting reactions to those stories. And I was like, that's interesting. So like, then you fast forward a year later to fall of 16, and suddenly it was so funny I think for a lot of us who for like years have been like, there's kind of some stuff going on here that's a little concerning. And then suddenly the New York Times was like, there's stuff going on and it's really concerning. Did you know people lie on the web? And I remember thinking, gosh, I mean, I think we all knew that and we were aware of it and we talked about it. And I remember trying to get people to acknowledge it. I remember being in a meeting once and saying, I think we need to be teaching students about these fundamentals, about the way the web works. And the reaction being like, well, that's like teaching kids how to balance a checkbook. Why would we teach them that? That's life skills. That's not knowledge. That's not the academy. And then you get to 2016 and beyond, and you realize, oh, actually, understanding the way all of this works may be the most important thing that we need to know right now. Because if we don't understand it, we are being shaped and controlled and manipulated without even realizing it. And our students are as well. So if we're not talking about that here, where is anybody talking about it? Like, how does anybody learn that? So if I have any regret, it's that I, from my small, podium here, didn't push harder on that. Didn't when my students said to me, no, it's just storytelling, that I didn't in that moment say, let's dig a little deeper into that. Let's talk more about that.
Well, we've got about 15 minutes left. So I want to make sure that other folks can, oh yes, Gardner, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I have some specific regrets that this is a good time to articulate. One, just to piggyback on what Martha has said so eloquently, is that like all of us in the heady days of Web 2.0, we had seen the light. It was no longer about buying this box. It was no longer about doing this thing with this piece of equipment. It was about wikis, it was about blogs, it was about control panel, it was about all these things, which is true. But it took me several years to understand that there was this layer underneath all of that, which was really where we needed to stand. And that was, again, just to piggyback on what Martha said, there's a conceptual framework about this that goes right back to some of the earliest dreams of the digital innovators. Now, later, I got to do more with that at other jobs, including VCU. That was where I did the most with it. I wish I'd gotten there earlier. I was experiencing it, but there were so many new things coming to, and new people coming down the pipeline. So many connections were being made that I couldn't see. No, we need to go back. We need to make this academic in the best sense. We need to have some way to study this, not just to narrate it, curate it, and share it, but to study it. And that would mean going back and reading some stuff. So that's one regret. Another regret is I should not have left the University of Mary Washington in the fall of 2006. I knew it was a mistake almost immediately and spent a very, very dark fall trying to clamber my way back, and with a lot of help from friends in the faculty and elsewhere, I was able to come back as a tenured professor of English. But it was a close thing. And there was, it seemed logical at the time, as many mistakes do. My number one regret, though, is even bigger than that. And that was when and again, this is to the cost of things, I didn't understand that if a potentially influential person in the environment had a light bulb that had gone off in the projector in the room where she taught biology, I should freaking well get that light bulb fixed if I had to go down and do it myself at 8 o'clock at night. Why? Because it's real easy to make an enemy, and the enemy you make may hold a grudge. And honestly, I think it is kind of a crappy thing to leave a faculty member without a bulb and a projector, so that even if it's just PowerPoint slides on a screen, they can't do that the next time they go in the room. Now, to be fair, that was not my direct responsibility, but the person whose responsibility it was my responsibility. And I was a little too kind or skittish or some combination of the two to do the thing I needed to do, which is to say, yes, I hear you. Now I want you to go do that. I want you to do it right this moment. I don't care what else you're doing. You need to do that. A colleague is floundering. And later, I heard that when it came time for me to come back, one of the principal objections to me doing anything in teaching and learning technologies in any formal capacity was that I had not seen to it that that bulb got replaced. And I get that now. I'm still angry about it, but I don't know that that was unfair. So in the midst of all of this, it's not just about keeping the trains running on time. It really is about meeting basic needs and all of the rest of this. And that was a hard lesson to learn. I'm not sure I ever learned it completely, but a big regret, probably my biggest one.
That's a really great answer. We have a few minutes for other questions. Yes. Here, let me bring you the mic.
My question's already been asked, but I was just really curious about Shannon's answer to what you would have done differently as one of the people that's still working there and is dealing with the aftermath of this very innovative period of time.
Oh gosh, great. Now, I wish Jeff was still here. Because he was my advisor. Yeah, I was going to make a jokey response, like one semester I was in academic probation and I could not work for the DTLT, and that was the worst semester of my life. I also ate Martha's Triscuits when she was pregnant, and that was a big mistake. Don't finish a pregnant woman's box of Triscuits. I would say it's really hard for me to say that I have any regrets about things. I guess it's my biggest thing is in order for me to have moved into the space I am now, so many people had to leave, right? The institution was not going to make that unit any bigger than it, those kinds of things. So for me right now, it's, trying to continue and carry on the legacy with like Jerry and Cartland and do those kinds of things forward and do that next step. Where are we going next with all these things? So,
I don't have so many regrets for us. I have regrets for all of our institutions because the reality is we're institutionally so bad at recognizing the value of humans and what happens when you put the right humans together. And I'm sure everyone in this room can talk about a time when they thought, God, if I could just work with that person, if we could just get more time together, more resources, if we could get one more position, if we could reorganize a little bit. But because of bureaucracy, because of hierarchy, because of org charts, because of light bulbs, that kind of stuff doesn't happen. And it's, some of that is just the nature of what institutions are, but some of it is also because we have a failure of imagination of what institutions could be. And we're really bad at recognizing that the people are what matter here. Like the people are who we are loyal to. And that's a regret that I feel like I wish we could figure out at a higher level.
A quick, Martha's point's exactly right, I think, in so many ways. The other thing that I will add into that equation is something that Gardner talked about, and we all have talked about to a degree, and that is, and when Gardner and I talk about this, we often talk about why do the best bands break up? And the answer is people evolve, and sometimes the chemistry that works at a particular time can't happen as easily or can't be sustained easily. That, in our case here, I think there were many things that contributed to changing, life circumstances, a variety of other things that meant that what we had built in terms of the team was limited in time span. But to get to Martha's point, it has to be resilient. It has to be able to survive those kinds of evolutions. And that's another bad grade for the institution. If the institution doesn't understand, number one, how to keep the team, and number two, when you can't keep the team, how you preserve the team momentum through change.
I would also add to that, like to bring it full circle back again too, as though I don't have regrets in the same sense that when it comes to design, constraints are a good thing. So there's this fine balance between hoping you get those massive teams, you get those massive budgets, you get an amazing building, and you're out of the theater building. And now you're in this cool convergence center with all this technology, and things just don't hit the same, right? Like suddenly without those constraints, you can't make the good stuff, right? And so I think there's sometimes a danger of putting a lens today on something that happened in the past and going, well, if I had just had this, or if I had had that, and sometimes you're given all of that and it makes things worse. And so I actually, and obviously, again, there's a balance. Sometimes it's like, bad things are just bad, right? Like, when positions are cut, things are worse, right? And stuff like that. But at the same time, I think to some extent we did work within the constraints we had. And, instead of having a massive TV studio, we had a laptop with a computer, in a book bag, and that was enough. And we did amazing things with it. And so I do treasure those moments to be able to have done that, with what we had.
I'll just build a joke on that. One of the things that came when we moved into this room, and I was talking, I think it was with Brian Lamb, I'm not sure, and he was pulling his best Barton Fink impression. He's like, they're gonna notice, Fink. You don't want them to notice. And it's funny because for years we talked about the presidential problems here. We had 3 or 4 presidents in 5 years. It was a complete chaos, and it was the greatest moment for us because no one could think at all about what we were doing and cared. They just wanted to make sure that the president wasn't drunk driving off the street. So we were in heaven. And I think once they took a notice, Fink, it was an interesting shift because we had a ton of money. in terms of a building, not in terms of resources. And there is that really interesting dynamic that's hard to understand. But back to another point I think I was talking about with Kathleen yesterday is, you know, we're also in a very different mode of structure of higher ed in terms of corporate structure. And that idea of a lot of what we're talking about post-pandemic and a lot of what many people, I'm sure in this room, felt as a result of what we went through as higher ed organizations and even as Reclaim, looking from the outside in now, it was a particular moment where that took on a kind of new tenor of intensity in terms of resources and keeping people together and building a group and then maintaining a group throughout all of the demands now on top of, like, you know, presidential issues, but also just working from home or not, or like very simple things that have kind of come home to roost for us as institutions. And where are we putting our priorities? In the people, in the buildings? Because it seems buildings in some ways have taken more priority than people. And there may be a little bit of a proverb or an allegory or something there that I'm not smart enough to articulate, but that's interesting to me. Anyway, back to you, Lauren.
We have time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
I'm not sure who's best to direct this to. It might be Gardner and might be some of the people that were at DTLT really early, like when I first came here, which was, I realized was 18 years ago. What were the first meetings where I presume it was Gardner said, I want you to get domains and I want you to do everything out of cPanel? And how did the people feel when you heard that?
Well, I can see how it happened, and I would love to know how people feel about it. Before we go completely off the air, I hope you all know that I loved working with you. You get that?
Yep.
Yep.
Every day.
So Chip and I had gone to see a man about Blackboard at William and Mary, and that was Gene Roach, and it was all about how can we combine courses in Blackboard, you know, the really sophisticated stuff you want to do with the internet. But hey, you know, people combine courses. So I saw Gene blogging, and Gene's a really interesting person anyway. He really is kind of a Pete Seeger, you know, Johnny Appleseed kind of a guy. And on the way back, I said to Chip, what if, because this was always my thing, if this happens with this person here, what if we had 6 people do it here? And then what if each of those people got 6 more people to do it? First thing you know, you have a World Wide Web. So I came back and I said, so first of all, I got Chip to actually agree without running it by university council. I don't think he did that. There was no attempt to make sure there were no hold harmless clauses, all the stuff I know how to do now. But thank God I didn't know about that then. And I'm sure Chip knew, but Chip's an artist, people. You need to know that about Chip. And I got to talk with an artist every Friday afternoon for 3 hours who was my boss. And that's, wow. I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. So I came back and I said, okay, everybody, here's what I want you to do. We're all going to blog. We're all going to have our own domains. We're going to buy you these domains from a company that then went out of business 6 months later, but who knew? See the naivete. But we did it. And some people were like, what? And some people were like, oh, that sounds good. And then they never did. And some people were like, no, I don't think that's a good idea at all. What is it you want us to do? And what will I blog about? I don't even know. I don't have ideas. I don't have anything to talk about, etc. It was the full, gamut, as you can imagine. But some people took to it right away, and other people said, oh, I see somebody's taking to it. Maybe I'll take to it too. And then it accelerated again because Chip kept introducing me to environments where I would find these other people. So that's how I met Brian Lamb. That's how I met Brian Alexander. That's how I went to MIT for the first time and had my eyes opened wide. And also we had a provost who had helped to bring a high-speed network to Mary Washington. And so there were a number of people invested, and I had to find the lucky people who would be shareholders. And enough people did it, a critical mass assembled, and then it really got started when Martha came. That was the time when suddenly a lot of it had to do with that environment. We started to go, oh. And then certain other faculty started getting that experience too. Then it was that job description where I wanted to make sure that anybody who came in knew this is what we were doing. It's the best job description I've ever written. A lot of input from the team. It was pretty crazy. I think the word zany was in there. I believe that was the crowning touch. And Jim gets off the train and says, yeah, I was watching the new War of the Worlds on the way in. Well, it was actually something I downloaded somewhere. I shouldn't tell you that. And I was like, oh, okay. Come on in. This is interesting. And it went from there. But it was a range of responses, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. And the big moment for me was in the spring of 2006 when John Udell was at Faculty Academy, and the whole team, with me sitting out, just watching, just getting out of the way. The whole team articulated what we called the Bluehost experiment, which was the early days of what we're describing now. And not only did they describe it accurately, they described it in such a compelling fashion that John Udell's jaw was on the floor. That doesn't happen a lot. And then I was like, yep, that works.
I will say,
To your question, Brian, what it felt like when this was presented to us, for me, I think I can speak for Andy and Jerry, because this echoes something Andy already said. It felt like school. It didn't feel like work. It felt like learning. It felt like school. It felt like, and that's why I work in higher education. I mean, it's why I've chosen to do this with my life. It's because I want to be learning. I want to be in school. And that's what being given that felt like.
And I'll say one more thing on that. It was like a school coming out of a grad school program that I never got my PhD in. It was like a school without the jargon. Because you were actually online working with people who kind of really care if you had a degree or not. And that was the most liberating element of that school. It was a school with a completely new context. And not that everything that I had learned at grad school was relevant, but also was in a completely new frame. And that was amazing to walk into a job where that was the expectation. That was like, wow, I don't have to go back to that PhD program.
I mean, it wasn't part of my job, although you did encourage me to blog, but to what you just said, to be, as a student, to be considered somebody who had something to say was, invaluable, that I could be part of that conversation, because, having those spaces means anybody can enter into them, not just people who are experts. Was I intimidated? Yes, probably, because Jim Groom had a reputation. So I had a good friend who was a year older than me that was also a student aide. So I was very excited but very nervous because I knew these people were smart, because Martha and Jerry showed up at my class, introduced blogging my freshman year, and so I was. Yeah, I thought there was speculation in their class. They were either married or brother and sister because of the banter. But I mean, that speaks to, right, that level. And I immediately, but though, could feel the camaraderie in the room, right? Like having the bullpen, being able to sit there. I think I was often intimidated, but also I wanted to be there. I felt I was comfortable. I wanted to be around smart. That's why I came to Mary Washington. I was like, I wanted to be around smart people, even if I didn't understand what they were saying half the time. I remember Gardner's, some of his posts I would read and be like, I don't know what this means. There's so many allusions and metaphors. I gotta Google when I read his stuff. But I got there, right? That putting that ball just right in front of you, I gotta keep reaching. I want to understand what they're talking about, that reaching that I was looking for, that I got, which is probably why I didn't do great in classes. But I wouldn't regret not going to all those classes, because I was sitting in DTLT learning from really smart people. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think I think what matters is that people, the commenting really, it's not just the putting yourself out there, which is overwhelming, but then having people kind of come into that space and then say, this is great. That's that eased all those kinds of things.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us, giving us this time. It's been great.
Yeah. Part one of the indulgence of the next 3 days.
So as we transition, there's going to be, grab a cup of coffee, stretch your legs. We're going to move some furniture around for a minute, and then we'll get started on brainstorming.